Hi there. In this lecture we see Mikhail Tal playing against Mikhail Botvinnik in the 1960 World Championship match. This is their first encounter in round 1. First round, e4 from Tal, we see e6, a French defense. From Botvinnik, d4, d5, knight c3, bishop b4, we enter into the French defense Winawer variation. So white structurally has been damaged, but white does have a bishop without a counterpart, and this can be really dangerous. We see queen c7, queen g4, and now f5, so laterally defending g7 here. Alternatively, if knight e7, this is a very topical variation. Queen takes g7, rook g8, queen takes h7, c takes d4, knight e2. This is a very well beaten path, with white playing f4 here, and then the queen coming back, and then this has been seen many, many times before, this variation. It's thought that white has an advantage here, but it is complex for both sides. So f5 though was played. We have queen g3, knight e7, and here, in fact, this might seem white's moving a lot of times with the same piece, but given that g7 has been offered now, Tal actually accepts the gambit here. Queen takes g7 and queen takes h7. We have c takes d4, so there's an immediate idea of queen takes c3. And now a very interesting solution to this, king d1. Knight e2 was also possible. So for example, this way of playing things with h4, it looks as though white's not moving pieces and moving pawns, but it's actually, on this occasion, it's kind of justified. Potentially, after rook h3, a move like rook h3, black's counterplay is lessened. And rook a2 as well to protect c2 is plausible. So this kind of situation, with careful play, white can actually emerge with a nice advantage. So there are some key rook maneuvers here which look very, very strange, but they work well in this variation. But we see king d1, bishop d7. If queen takes e5, then knight f3 and queen h5 check. And here c takes d4, undoubling the pawns, gives white a very, very nice position. If you look at this, with the very dangerous dark square bishop, some holes around the place. These pawns on the light squares, but the adjacent dark square holes. White's advantage is pretty clear, actually. It seems after h4, for example, knight takes d4, bishop b2 is possible. This is not check or anything. And here, as an example, bishop takes d4, e takes, king d2, and black's king is a little bit in trouble there. And even this is possible with the black king in the center. For example, queen takes g5, h takes, yes, this is not completely mad, because after rook takes h1, bishop b5 check, taking on d7, taking on h1, white ends up with a big advantage. So there's some very interesting variations behind the scenes. But, okay, bishop d7 was played. We have queen h5 check, knight g6, knight e2. It would be far too risky in this situation now to play f4, it seems. This is a way to get a very troublesome position. As an example, if d takes, knight f3, knight c6, knight g5, black's getting a super pleasant position here, as an example with this variation, where, okay, the king was moved to put the queen back, but black's got a lot of piece activity, and you know the d pawn looks dangerous. This is not a pleasant position at all. The rooks are kind of, you can see the rooks are kind of killed here. They're not really in the game. This h-pawn is more of a theoretical thing here. Okay, with this very easy plan for black to follow. Lots of easy plans for black to follow. So we have knight e2. So this is much more interesting. d3 is played. If queen takes e5, c takes d4, this situation with knight f4, queen c3, rook b1, this situation is a completely different story. You can see white's activity, the rooks are alive and kicking, they're not asleep. There's pressure points on black. White has a big advantage there. So that is, yeah, much more interesting for white there. Okay, so yeah, queen takes e5, c takes d4 is a good move. Not bishop f4, because the queen could drop back, and again, you know, this is only about even this position. So okay, in the game now, knight e2, we have d3, a very interesting move, trying to rip open this key diagonal for that bishop, so trying to make sure this bishop's a real pain. And Tal actually dares to take that. We have bishop a4 check, king e1, and now queen takes e5. Bishop g5 though now cuts off the black king from an idea of castling queenside ever. Knight c6, d4, queen c7, and now h4. And you might think this is about the h pawn, you know, potentially getting up the board. Actually, it gives a new resource in this position. After e5, can you see what that new fantastic resource is to start using? So 100 points. What would you play with white here? And it's a critical moment, a very critical moment. Okay, it's actually rook h3. This is very, very important to get the rook into the game. This is one of those positions you've got to sort of do it yourself to get the rooks into the game, especially castling is impossible for both sides. On the queen side, that's been restricted. The king cannot pass through on either side, but the rook h3, getting the rooks into the game, or this rook at least. If white had played d takes e5, different story totally after knight takes. What is white doing? Big threats like knight d3, f4. Maybe knight d3 can be tolerated, but knight g4 is even better. And black's got a big advantage here. The queen's kind of cut off. f4 looks potentially vulnerable. The d file looks vulnerable. Yeah, things look vulnerable, like d4 coming in. The king looks very scary in the center without f2 to use. So rook h3 is much better king safety for white. Much better overall. No major holes like on g4. We see queen f7. If e takes d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, then white can play knight takes d4 safely because the rook is also guarding c3. It's taking care of that issue. So queen f7 was played. D takes e5, knight c takes e5, rook e3, king d7, and now rook b1. And the other rook is also now alive and kicking. So both rooks adding pressure to the black position. Okay, white technically is a pawn up, but the pieces are kept, you know, very active and positive. So knight f4, rook a e8, rook b4, because the d1 square can't be used because of the bishop looking. But this way is a great way to pressurize that isolated queen's pawn. That is the big target of the black position right now, as well as gaining a tempo on the bishop. So the bishop moves in advance to protect d5. If b5, white can actually play, what would you play here with white for 50 points? Yeah, a tactic is possible. Knight takes d5 because of rook d4. So the bishop goes back, but now queen d1, queen finally goes back and it's looking at d5. Things are coming together for white. Knight takes f4. We have rook takes f4. The position is good here and there's options. That's a good sign. Bishop takes f4 is an option as well. This is also kind of a pleasant enough position for white here. White's got the advantage there. But rook takes f4 was played, keeping the bishop on that diagonal. Knight g6, now rook d4. And here we see rook takes e3 check, f takes e3, king c7. But now Tal ramps up the pressure on the d5 pawn. Can you guess what is played here for 50 points? Okay, c4, yeah, ramping up the pressure on d5. With d8 control, this is really, really cool. There's no rook d8. We have d takes c4, which loses the exchange. The position is very, very hard to defend here. If bishop b7, giving up the pawn, that pawn's going to be a menace after. For example, like this, hitting the rook, bishop b5, it's going to be an absolute menace. For example, like this, with check, you know, winning material, it's going to cause overload. So d takes c4 though was played, and this loses the exchange. So Tal takes that off. He's won the exchange, and now after h5, Botvinnik resigned here without playing on. If knight e5, for example, bishop f4, that bishop's fantastic, and black is overloaded with this pass pawn as well. So say king b7, h7, knight g6, something like king f2 here. Well, king f2 specifically is a good idea. Queen f7, queen h1 to try and push this pawn a bit more, or get in with the queen. And this is going to be crushing. There are crushing variations. Why is the exchange up? So I'll take you to the game end. So a 32 move. We're not too long, but it is longer than most of the games in this course. By the way, have been kept the short selection. But this is such a high-profile game. I thought it needed to be looked at. So what are our takeaway points from this seemingly wild game? It did seem to be wild. If you can't develop your rooks into the game via normal casting, you've got to improvise. So this is a great improvisation. These h4 for rook h3, getting the rooks in the game, not giving oneself a situation when there's enormous holes as a result of taking rather than letting the opponent take. So it was very, very delicate scenarios to navigate to make sure that the white pieces are the central focus, not trying to push this pawn too far down the board. That was only to try and get the rook in. That h-pawn was largely theoretical. It was the pressure points on the black position which really were the main consideration, putting pressure and setting problems for the opponent. And Tal ramped up the pressure on the d-pawn in the end, and that led to black's downfall here. So a very, very interesting game. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks so much. Hi there. Thanks for getting to the end of the YouTube video. If you would like to see other Mikhail Tal games, I actually have an amazing course for Mikhail Tal, which is currently at 4.9 with over 400 students. You can check this out from the Kingscrusher TV page. So Chess Strategy and Tactics, Mikhail Tal's amazing games. You can check out some free preview videos as well here. If you do expand all sections, you can see the preview links to get some free previews. So I hope you do check out this course index and the free previews. So I really had a thrilling time actually checking out Mikhail Tal's games. So yeah, the YouTube video here you saw was just a sample from this course. I hope you check it out. Okay, thanks so much. Oh, by the way, comments, questions, likes, shares, all appreciated. And if you did get to this part of the video, please do leave some sort of comment like Tal fan. Okay, thanks again.